Alright YouTube, we got the 56 Studebaker Power Hawk back in the garage. I'm going to show you something I don't show a lot of on YouTube yet, and that's the passenger side of this car. This passenger door is really ugly. Somebody did some body work on there, or something that they called body work. Probably back in the 70s, I have no idea when, but they butchered the hell out of this, man. Pulled it out with a slide hammer, poked a bunch of holes in it, and made it look like a golf ball or the surface of the moon or something. Anyhow, that's what I'm going to be tackling next. This is going to be a big job for me. I've never done any kind of metal work, metal straightening work, anything like that, so we're going to give it a shot. Of course, the glass on this side is all cracked. It's in a lot worse shape than the driver's side. The driver's side's actually halfway decent. Glass is all cracked. All the U-channels are worn out. The U-channels are coming out of the clips inside the door. The rubbers, I'll have to assess the rubber once I get it off. Got the door off the car, got it up on a workbench. I'm getting a look at the mechanism inside for the first time, really closely looking at it, and it's in horrible shape. You can see, well, maybe you can't see on the camera, but this is completely bent here. This is supposed to be straight, and it's at about a 25 degree angle bent. So this is all binding up in here. The first step of this is to get these clips out of here. You can barely see it right there. There's a clip. My finger's just touching it inside. There's one of those here and another one of those here. There it is. It looks like it's in decent shape and reusable, which is a good thing because I'm not sure I can get them. And there's the other clip out. As you can see, the mechanism is now separated from the piece of glass, and I should be able to get that piece of glass out the top. Clunk sound was this falling to the bottom. This is the track. I started pulling back the weather stripping, and I noticed way up in there there's a couple of screws that keep the the vent window assembly attached to the door. So I think, okay, that screw came out without any problem whatsoever. I think I've just got 1, 2, 3. Well, I already took this one out, so 2 left here on the outside, and then that vent window frame and mechanism should pop right out of there. I'm trying to get the fuzzy stuff out of the window channel here. The clips that hold it in are so rusty, they're just snapping. There's absolutely no way to get these out of here intact. Hopefully I can order some new ones, and we will see about that. Meanwhile, I'm going to try my best to get the rest of these out of here without snapping them off. that's that. Right in the middle of the screen, you'll see that there's an oval slot. It looks like a racetrack at the very bottom of that bracket there. That's inside the door. Well, that little oval racetrack slot attaches to this tab on the bottom of the U channel. I have to remember to get that on the new U channel before I try to put it in. And this is the old piece of fuzzy window channel lining that I took out. You can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tabs. Good heaven, it took about 1,000 turns to get that lock button off of there. Since I have the latch out, I will clean it and lubricate it before I put it back in. This is the rod that goes all the way up to the door handle. I got the lock cylinder and the rod out. I meant to film taking it out, but it came out so easily because it was so loose in there that before I knew it, it was just laying on the floor. But I'll try to show you how it goes in and what keeps it in. So you've got the hole in the door. The rod goes up through that. You can see that there's a couple of slots in the side right below the bezel there, and that's inside the door once you stick it in there. And this clip fits down in those slots inside the door, and it snugs up in there and keeps it securely fastened to the door. So except for the horrible bodywork on the front, I'm generally pleased with the condition of the door. It's going to be completely restorable. Typically they rot out along the bottom, and there is a lot of surface rust here that I'm going to have to clean up. But there's really no rust through. The only place I saw where there's a pinhole is right here on this corner for some reason, which that's easily fixable. That's not going to be a problem at all. I'll weld that right up. And we'll see. I may change my mind once I hit it with get the rust off there, hit it with a wire wheel and see what the metal really looks like. But I don't see anything that's not repairable here. It all looks very easily repairable. I flipped it over just so y'all could get a better look at what I'm up against here with this. This whole section here is just boogered up. Like I said earlier, it looks like the surface of the moon. Somehow I have to try to straighten that out. Or would it just be easier to weld in a new piece of 18 gauge steel? I do have some 18 gauge handy. We will see. I'm going to think about it, sleep on it overnight. Just one thing left to disassemble on this door, and that's to get the handle off. It's really just held in by one screw. The front of it just hooks into the door, so once a guy gets this screw off, you just kind of shove it back and the whole thing kind of pops out. No, definitely not frozen. I could turn it with one hand without even hardly trying. It doesn't look like that's the right washer for that either. It looks like that washer was for a bit bigger screw. I'll see if I can find something more appropriate. Okay, I've made my decision. I decided that I'm not going to try to use a hammer and dolly to flatten and straighten this out. I simply don't have the skills for that. And there's really not enough access room to be able to do what I need to do inside that door. So instead I'm going to weld a new piece of 18 gauge steel in here to replace this old nasty metal. The tools I'm going to use for that are poster board for making a template, and a slope or curve measuring tool to measure the slope on the good door, the driver's side door, and apply that to the new sheet metal on the passenger side door. So what you do is essentially take this to the curve that you want to measure. Get the curve applied to the tool by sort of very gently slapping it on there. Once you get the curve, you apply it to the new piece of metal, and you basically bend the metal until it fits this curve. One of the challenges I'm going to face in fabricating and fitting this new sheet metal is getting this lip to wrap around and conform to the edge of the door. So I think it's going to be way too difficult to get that lip folded up and make a new lip in the new piece of sheet metal, so I'm probably going to cut it right up to about here. Even though this piece has dents in it too, it's going to be a lot easier to straighten this once I get this piece cut out of there. I'm doing this mainly because I think folding that lip under is just probably going to be too much. It's not going to turn out good. So yeah, that's going to be the basic shape of the piece, the 18 gauge that I'm going to lay this on. With that template on here, I made some Sharpie marks, just a few of them, just to see how high up that patch is going to come, just to make sure that I've got all the bad metal, the really boogered up metal, covered. You know, I haven't made it too short or anything like that. The highest point of the boogered up metal is probably right in here, and then it kind of slopes off on this side, slopes off on this side. So by running the patch all the way up here, I should absolutely have all of that taken care of. Alright, the next step is to get that curve in here so that it matches the shape of the door. You can see it's not totally flat on there. I don't have an English wheel or any really fancy tools to get the curve in there because it's just a basic curve and it doesn't change from the length of the door side to side. I'm just very, very gently going to bend it with my hands over the door itself. Possibly over my knee, possibly over a piece of PVC pipe. Wish me luck, we'll see how it goes. You can see I went a little bit overboard on the curve. I got the curve in exactly the right place, the entire length of the piece of sheet metal, but I did overdo it just a little bit. I'm not going to try to take that out. That's going to straighten out when I weld it down. Maybe I'll take it out just a tiny little bit. It's picking up, but I created a few high spots in here. I'm going to mark all of those with a Sharpie and give them one or two smacks with the hammer just to bring them down so it won't mess up my final finish. Just real quick, I wanted to clamp down the area where the curve was a little bit over-exaggerated here, just so I can see how it's going to look when it's welded in. And I want to check it with my curve measuring tool. Sorry about that. We'll slide this along the length of the door to see if we see any light coming through, and if so, how much. Folks, all in all, that looks awesome. Now I'm going to go after those high spots one by one. I think any high spots that are left in there are going to be relatively inconsequential. So I taped this off. I'm going to cut this little corner off here. I'm going to cut this piece so it follows the body line of the car. I think that's just going to help save me some issues when I try to go welding it in. I was overlooking at the driver's side of the door, the side that's undamaged, and this body line comes down pretty deep, down to about here where my finger is, roughly an inch from the bottom, inch and a half from the bottom. So I think it's going to be easier in the long run if I just take this corner off. Got the new sheet metal clamped on there. I'm going to go around the edge with a Sharpie, and I'm going to cut just inside that line. I'm going to make my cuts a little smaller than the actual size, and then I'll trim them out a little bit bigger as needed, just to make sure I don't accidentally have too wide of a gap to weld. Once I make the cuts, that's the point of no return, so I'm going to kind of ease it into the right size and not try to do it all in one cut. The cut line's marked with green Sharpie on the left and on the top. However, on the right and on the bottom, you can see I marked a line in red Sharpie that's about 1 inch inboard of the edge of the door. The reason for that is twofold. It helps me ease the cut on in, like I said I'm going to do. But also you'll remember that I'm not going to create the flap in the new metal and then bend the flap under like was done on the original sheet metal. My plan is to weld it as close to the edge as possible. And in order to do that, I have to have access underneath this strip here. I need to straighten it out, and I also need to pull it up a little bit. I need to pull it up a little bit so that I don't accidentally cut through the inside portion of the door. You might notice I'm making really shallow cuts. I'm not trying to go any deeper than I absolutely have to, just in case there's something underneath there that I would hit and cut through that's part of the inner door. I absolutely want to avoid that. All right, so I told you the green line is the cut line, and that is the ultimate cut line. However, I'm making all my cut lines about 1 inch inboard as I start out, just to make sure, like I said, I can dial the cut in and not overshoot and not have too wide of a gap that I need to weld. So my first cut up here is not going to be on the green line. It's actually going to be about 1 inch inboard of that. One whole zip disc to get that cut out. I wore this one right down to the nub. So having this hole cut in here presents a good opportunity to get in there and clean everything out really good. Hit it with a wire brush, hit it with some rust converter. Just clean it up in there, make it decent in there so that it'll last a long, long time. There's a lot of crud and rust down in that crack too. I will be able to clean most of it out and put some rust converter in there. It's going to clean up pretty good. It's not rusted through anywhere. I'm happy to see that. I'm going to do a little more cleaning down in there. Some wire wheeling, some sanding, etc. And then I'm going to coat this with some rust converter. But I just wanted to get you a quick shot of what it looks like down in that crevice. It's actually not terrible. There's some pinholes, but no major rust through whatsoever, which I'm actually pretty amazed by, given the age of this vehicle. All right, time to straighten out this lip. Hammer and dolly. We have this access, I can actually try to straighten this out. There's a pretty good low spot here and a high spot right next to it and low spot right there. I can't get a hammer up in there really to hammer it, but I can stick a dolly under there and hammer on the high spots here, and it'll help it a little bit. definitely getting better. There's still a high spot right here, and there's still a low spot right here. I'm going to keep working on them a little more. So I did a little more work on this with the hammer and dolly, and I went over it with the sander just to make it easier to see my work. And all of this is good. This is perfect back here. This bit here is pretty darn close to perfect. The only low spot I have is right where you see my fingers right now, right in here. Very, very slight. Much, much better than it was. It'll take an extremely minimal amount of filler to level that out and make it smooth and fix it. And so I'm done with this part. So what I ended up doing is just laying the new sheet metal over the old in the position I want it to be, clamped it down, and I'm going to cut through on this tape line, and I'm going to score the metal underneath but not cut through it, and that'll help me be able to visualize where I need to cut the metal underneath to make these two pieces perfectly made up. The metal underneath, obviously I have to be super careful with that because I don't want to cut through the inner metal. I only want to cut the outer metal. Boy, that's good. Alright, I dressed it up with the grinder some just to make any little areas that weren't fitting fit a little bit better. And as you can see, I've got a pretty damn near perfect fit here on the bottom. None of those gaps are going to be real huge. They're pretty small. You got to leave a little gap because you got to be able to get the weld down in there. So I've got this taped off on the edge. I'm going to do the same thing. We're going to cut through it very carefully and just score the piece underneath it just enough so that I can then lift this off and cut it the rest of the way through without cutting through the inner door, anything on the inner door, which is what I'm trying to avoid at all costs. Got the new piece of sheet metal lightly clamped down on here, but in the exact position I want it in. You can see I've got really nice fit on the bottom, really nice fit on the right hand side here. The next step is just to cut very carefully along the top and along the left side, being careful not to make it too big. But while I've got this clamped down in here, I went around the edge and scribed a very pronounced line in it with a sharp nail, so that's what I'm going to follow when I do my cutting. Folks, I have to apologize. I made this cut. I had the camera set up and I thought I had it turned on and recording. It looks like I didn't. But as you can see, I'm following the line I scribed slightly to this side of the line. The idea is you want to leave enough room for error. If you cut it too small, then you've got too big of a gap to fill in with weld. I'm trying to avoid that. I did make a couple of screw-ups here. I accidentally cut through the inner part of the door. That's one thing I was trying really hard to avoid, but the good news is it's a 1/16 of an inch gap. I can go back after I'm finished and weld it up from the other side. I'm keeping my gaps as small as possible, which means there's not a lot of room for the weld to go once it starts to flow. To make just a tiny little bit more room for the weld to go, I'm going to sort of chamfer the outside cut. So not quite a 45-degree angle, but I'm going to put a little bit of a chamfer in that on both pieces, the door and the new piece of sheet metal, and it'll just allow the weld to have a place to flow. So we're going to remove the paint about 1/4 of an inch in all the way around. I got the new piece of sheet metal laid in the hole gently. I've got it secured with about 6 clamps. I'll use a whole lot more clamps when I actually start to weld it. I just wanted to get it in there and check the rough fit. Just to make sure I hadn't screwed anything up in a major way. And right now I'm super pleased with where I'm at. Now that I've got the rough shape of the piece pretty much perfect, I'm going back around to sort of fine-tune it a little bit. Just pressing it down flush with my fingers and looking for areas that where the gap is too narrow. Marking them with a Sharpie, and I'm going to go back and hit those with a grinder. There's one example there. Another good example right up here at the top where I've marked it with the green Sharpie. I just need to shave off the tiniest little fraction of a millimeter there just to make enough gap for the weld to go into. The inside of this door is really in pretty good condition. I went over everything with a wire wheel just to get the surface rust knocked down. Now I'm going to treat it with some Eastwood rust converter. This is contacting a weldable area. I'm going to have to sand it back off, obviously, scrape it out of there, but I want to get it down in all the nooks and crannies as far as I can. This is the inside of the new piece of sheet metal that I made. I'm going to clean this up and prepare it just to put a quick coat of paint on it just so that it doesn't rust. Obviously, when I go to weld it in, I'm going to have to sand that paint off of the edges. There's 2 coats of primer dried and ready for paint. So before I can weld on the new sheet metal that goes here, I got one thing I got to tend to. This area right around where the lock cylinder goes is kind of caved in. I'm going to have to try to, hopefully if I push it up with a dolly, I can kind of tap around the edges and get this high spot to go down. So I got all the paint and primer and whatever else was on there stripped off of it. Basically the area where I'm moving my finger is the area that's caved in. This is concave right here, so I'm going to try to push it out using this, this, and this. Can't really see exactly where you got the dolly, but you can hear it. When you hear that sound, you know that you've got the dolly exactly on the spot you want to push up. So tink, 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 and you go around the edges of where you hear tink, 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 and in theory it pushes the, well, I shouldn't say in theory, it seems to be working. It pushes the low spot up very, very slowly. So I think I got rid of 90%, if not 95% of the low spots in this. And that's where I'm going to end it right there. There's still a minuscule low area right here. I could probably keep going at it, but it's so tiny that at this point I know it's going to be very easily flattened out with some filler. And it won't be thick filler either, just a tiny skim coat. Next step really is just to weld in that patch. Before I do that, you'll remember I put rust converter on here, and of course some of it is on the edges where I'm going to be welding. Inadvertently got it there, so I'm going to go around and scrape all of that off. Hit it really, really well with a wire wheel. Make sure everything's gone before I start welding. I don't want to cause any contamination if I can avoid it.